Hello, friends and colleagues, and welcome to the Tourism Skillshop, hosted by State of Washington Tourism, SWT. My name is Matthew Ozuna, and I am the Destination Development Manager at SWT. I will introduce today's webinar on destination management techniques for overcrowding. Please utilize the chat and say hello. Let us know where you are zooming in from today. Feel free to share your comments in the chat box and use the Q&A feature as well. Michelle Thana is also joining us on the webinar today. She is the Director of Marketing at SWT, and she will be monitoring the chat and will help address questions from the audience near the end of the webinar. The Tourism Skillshop is one of many industry educational programs from State of Washington Tourism. This webinar series will engage with colleagues across the tourism sector and broaden their industry knowledge, skills, and network. Each webinar will highlight a specific issue or skill for tourism professionals to ponder and discuss with industry experts. State of Washington Tourism will host live webinars of the Tourism Skillshop on the third or fourth Thursday of every month from 10 to 11 a.m. These webinars are free and open to all tourism stakeholders. The webinars will also be recorded and shared with registrants as well as other users on the SWT YouTube channel. For Tourism Skillshop and other industry updates, news, and events, follow SWT on LinkedIn, subscribe to the Industry Update newsletter, and make sure to visit the SWT Industry website. Tourism stakeholders may also join the SWT Facebook group for further discussion on topics related to the Tourism Skillshop and other industry news, issues, and events. Now, let's talk about today's webinar. This webinar in the Tourism Skillshop will focus on destination management techniques to address overcrowding within the context of outdoor recreation and specifically in Washington State, though Rachel will probably give us a few examples of national parks around the country. Overcrowding is a major concern for popular attractions and destination communities in the state of Washington. This is especially true during peak season at large festivals and events, as well as state and national parks. It occurs when the number of people begins to strain the tourism ecosystem, resulting in environmental damage, overloaded infrastructure, and alienated residents. It also has detrimental effect on the visitor experience and threatens local culture and heritage. A combination of tourism stakeholders and destination management techniques is necessary in addressing overcrowding and to strive for sustainability. This webinar will feature industry experts with backgrounds in tourism planning, policy, and promotion, as well as a small tour operator and his perspective on how tourism-related businesses can support or how they can support and are affected by destination management techniques and government regulations. Get ready to join Rachel Collins from the National Park Service, Emily Reed, representing the Columbia Gorge Tourism Alliance, and Tommy Farris of Olympic Hiking Co. for a fascinating discussion on carrying capacity, visitor dispersal, seasonality, and diversifying tourism offerings. Panelists, thank you for being here today. I'm looking for a great discussion with our audience. And Emily, let's start with you. Go ahead and share your screen. Or excuse me, Rachel, let's start with you. Sorry, Emily, you're in the top left of my screen, but Rachel, you will start us off first. I apologize.
Okie doke. Let me go ahead and get my screen up and we will get going. You look good?
You look great.
Great. All right, let's dive in. So my name is Rachel Collins. I am a project manager with the National Park Service, and I work on visitor use management service-wide. One of the things I wanted to take some time today to do is talk a little bit about what is visitor use management, what are the total constructs, and what are some of the tools in the toolbox and the processes that we use within the agency to think about and plan for what does visitor use look like within not just the National Park Service, but also across the service. So Matt, am I okay? Go ahead and dive in.
Go right ahead.
So when we are talking about visitor use management, I wanted to just start by noting that we're in a really exciting time when it comes to visitor use of public lands, publicly accessible places. And there's so many current initiatives that are working to encourage access and encouraging people's connections to these areas. When we are encouraging this access, there's a corresponding need to heighten our proactive and thoughtful approach to managing use in a really sustainable kind of way. So when we say visitor use management, what we're really talking about is encouraging access, improving experiences, all while protecting resources that are connected with those spaces. It's really important to note here that when we say visitor use management, what we're not talking about are limiting opportunities or saying no to visitors or to opportunities. But what we are talking about is being thoughtful about managing crowding and congestion in a proactive way. To think strategically about how to ensure quality experiences and access to high valued opportunities and services. So we're connecting visitors with those resources. And if we do this well and we're vigilant in how we think about changing dynamics for visitor use, we can be really welcoming people to great experiences while protecting resources, which is vital to a lot of our agency missions. So why do we do visitor use management? Why do we call it this? We really want to be welcoming visitors to world-class experiences. We want to be thinking and deliberate about how we plan for it so that we can better provide those opportunities. And it's really important to be thinking about, especially from a public land agency's perspective, balancing visitor experiences with the protection and improvement of resources, which is why being proactive and strategic is so important, and that management is critical. So it's helping us really think about what are the tools in our toolbox so that we're maximizing opportunities for the public to be enjoying and making connections with public lands while also protecting those important and sensitive resources. When we talk about visitor use management, this really strikes at the heart of why people even come to public lands in the first place. And we're making an effort to work collaboratively and so that we're having results that benefit, including quality experiences, high customer satisfaction, protection of the very resources that visitors are coming to see, protection of the things that warranted designation for us in public lands, that warranted the designation of a National Park Service unit. And it's also about building proactive and collaborative relationships with stakeholders and communities and service providers who are our partners in improving those experiences and providing the public with a high quality recreation opportunity. We really want to stress the importance of collaboration associated with visitor use management, because when we work together, we can create innovative solutions through public-private partnerships to address ongoing needs around managing use, which we've noted is just an incredibly dynamic space for all of us to be working in. And so, just on the screen, there are some of the outcomes that we have of visitor use management and what it looks like when we engage in this in a proactive and strategic way. What we're going to see is outcomes. I wanted to spend a good chunk of my time talking about the structures and the processes that we have in our toolbox for making these kinds of decisions. And when I say be strategic, be thoughtful, be proactive, how do we do that? How do we be strategic and thoughtful and proactive about these incredibly dynamic scenarios? Well, there's a toolbox for that. This toolbox is from the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. You'll hear me say IVUMC a couple of times because that's a mouthful of an organization's name. But the IVUMC came together in 2011 to provide guidance and long-term visitor use management policy for the 6 federal agencies that manage land and water for the public. By doing this, we created consistent guidance across the agencies to help elevate the professional and scientific approach to managing use, and also provide a venue for increased communication and collaboration across at least the federal agencies that really results in improved efficiency and effectiveness in decision-making. So the council products are there on the screen. I'm going to spend the most time today talking about the framework that's really the heart of what we've got. And also there's a number of other tools, a whole guidebook on capacity, a whole guidebook on indicators. I also wanted to note before I dive into the meat of this, that while this framework was developed by and support and signed by the 6 federal agencies, there are a number of other agencies at all different levels that have picked up on this and are actively using it in their planning and in their thoughts, as well as other countries. So just to name a few, this is also the framework that Parks Canada is using for their VUM decision-making framework. I feel so lucky I get to meet with them like quarterly to talk about VUM stuff. Such a joy. ECMBio, which is the Public Lands Agency, is Brazil is using this. Iceland is using this. Palau is using this, as well as places like near to me, the city of Boulder, the state of New York, the state of Colorado, and a whole bunch of other state local agencies have picked this up and said, well, this is just really helpful tools and resources. And so anyway, so if you find it helpful for you, I hope you pick it up and use it.
Well, Rachel, and I would also add to that academic institutions and perhaps even some consulting firms. So well done.
Yep. So big picture, one of the first things the council did was work on consistency as far as defining concepts and terms across the agencies. And so the council defines visitor use management as the dynamic process of planning for and managing the characteristics of visitor use and the settings through a variety of strategies and tools. And this is all to sustain desired resource conditions and visitor experiences. So in short, visitor use planning is about the management of both people and resources with an eye towards sustaining both of them. The framework has 4 major elements. I'm going to do a high-level overview of each of them. The first element is about foundation building. So this is about understanding what needs to be done and how to organize going forward. So we're thinking about what is the purpose of what we are trying to work on. We're thinking about what is the problem that we're maybe trying to solve. Do we really understand not just the surface of the problem, but what's driving underneath it? What are the root causes that are connected to it? You see it when I work on planning workshops, I say, turn that rock over. What's underneath it? Chase that down. See what's at the root of that thing. Because we really want to be thinking about what is the problem and why is that problem worth solving? And both parts of that question are really important. And we also want to be thinking about what existing guidance do we already have that we can be using or that we should be fueling forward as we go into the next step, which is defining the visitor use management direction. What are we managing for? And why is that important to us? And that really gets into desired conditions for an area. What are those statements of aspiration? What are the visitor experiences meant to be in this place? What are the critical natural resources? What are the cultural resources? What are the other key values that really need to be protected in this place? What are our opportunities for enhancement? What's really meaningful about this area that should be at the forefront of our decision making? And so we want to be thinking about all of those things so that we can be thinking about how do we set up ourselves to be results oriented, focused, integrated, future oriented, and responsive as we start thinking about which tools are going to help solve these problems for us. Another part of this element is coming up with indicators, which are a specific resource or experiential attribute that can be measured or tracked over time to achieve your desired condition, and a threshold, which is a minimally acceptable condition. So you see this in your healthcare all the time, right? If you want to be healthy, one of the things you might track is your blood pressure. And if it's too low or too high, you might have a threshold that says, oh, it's too low, or oh, it's too high, and I'm going to adjust something within my lifestyle to make it more sustainable for me. And so you can start to think about that from the perspective too, of what are those key resource attributes? How would you track them over time? Okay. Then element 3 is about identifying management strategies. And so this is really thinking about where are you now? What's your current condition? What is your desired condition? Where do you want to be? And what's the gap between there? How far do you have to go? And then really thinking about what are the tools that you need to get you from where you are to where you want to go. And so this is where monitoring is really helpful. And also really thinking about all of the different tools that might be in your toolbox. And everybody's toolbox is going to look a little bit different. I have the distinct joy and pleasure of working on a national team for the Park Service, which means we service 400 plus units. And the solution that works in Acadia, I cannot pick it up and drop it in Yosemite Valley and think that that's going to work. They are different places. They have different neighbors. They have different environments. Their enabling legislations are different. So we got to be thinking about that context. It's really meaningful. And we also want to be thinking about a range of strategies, things like education, which is information, interpretation, signage, thinking about how might we think about engineering as a solution. So that's site design, construction, intersection improvements, those kinds of things. And we could be thinking about enforcement solutions. So things like group size limits, or even thinking about things like trail design. Is this meant for hikers or bikers or equestrian use? Those all have different impacts, and they might look differently as we think about that. And I have an example of that coming up in a slide here too. So we want to be thinking about that. And also I wanted to note here that step 10, where necessary, identify visitor capacities. We could talk, if people have got questions, happy to dig into it later about capacities. But realistically, we're thinking about what are the types and amounts of use that are helpful for maintaining those desired conditions going forward. And I also want to note it's step 10 in this framework. We don't start there. Capacities are an outcome of our decision making because we're thinking about what are all of the different inputs that go into making that kind of a decision. They're not an inherent necessarily property of place, that this place, regardless of what we do here, is always going to only be able to handle 5 people, 10 people, 5,000 people. Right. And so one of the examples that I like to give here is that, and I've got this picture of the boardwalk in, a wet meadow environment can handle very few people with no infrastructure. But if it's appropriate for you to put a boardwalk in, all of a sudden, a lot more people can be sustainably accommodated within that resource. So the types of actions that you take that are appropriate for your place are going to impact that capacity and impact that resource condition. Okay, that's enough on that. Then element 4 is about implementing, monitoring, and evaluating. As I've noted at the top, it's a very dynamic space that we're working in. Things are changing really quickly. So having those indicators and thresholds, having a monitoring program for understanding how will I know when I'm achieving my desired conditions, how will I know when I'm departing from them, is really going to be key for thinking about then which strategies might I need to intervene to help redirect back towards those desired conditions, and coming up with the like what is on your maybe list of like things we might do in the future, and when will we know that we need to move towards that kind of a strategy is an element 4. Okay, so a couple of examples I wanted to share. Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area is a National Park Service unit out east. It is 70,000 acres in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. One of the challenges we had is their original plan from the 80s. The superintendent used to say that that it basically said we're going to manage for everything, for all uses, everywhere, all of the time, which is really hard on 70,000 acres for every trail to be open to all uses and every beach to be open to all uses and all the time and for all different visitors. This park is 3 hours from New York City and 6 hours from Boston. That's a lot of different types of people wanting to recreate on this resource. So what we did was come in and really think about which uses for which users in which places and why in those places. And so the people who were picnicking at the boat launches, they just needed a picnic area. They didn't want to be at the boat launch. They just wanted to be near the water, but in the right place, and really thinking about design that way thoughtfully. And so they have these realistic management strategies now to address these issues, improve safety, put swimmers in places where it's safe to swim, put picnickers in a place where there's tables, and leave the boat launches for people who just want to be going and launching their boat instead of all these mixed uses. So that plan is publicly available. It's on the web. It's on a website. And if folks are interested, you're welcome to take a look at it. I also like this one because it's not a NEPA project. It's not like an EA or an EIS that you usually see from federal agencies. It's just a plan, which so anybody could pick this up and write one for your agency. Okay. The other one I wanted to share was Glacier Bay, front country plan. They're your neighbor just a little bit to the north, up in Southeast Alaska. They hadn't done planning in 20 years, and they found that their front country area of the park, it was really hard to say, is this a destination in and of itself where people come and spend a week? Or is it a launch point to our backcountry, which is the size of Connecticut? Their wilderness area is massive. What are we trying to do with this area? We have a lodge, we have a boat launch, we have a dock. Who are we serving with this? Why are we serving them? What are the values here, right? And so we really sunk in, spent some time working our way through the framework to help us think about, is this a destination in and of itself, or is it a transition point? And how would we think about those decisions? So what is that? And so that really helped us think through sustainability for tourism in the area, sustainability for the lodge that's there, restaurants and commercial services in that area, and how could the park be providing recreational assets in that area to enhance the tourism community as a whole for that. So another really cool, really interesting one, great tribal connections in that for folks to take a look at. And then the one I know is fresh on people's minds because we're in an active comment period is Mount Rainier. So we are in an active deliberative process for Mount Rainier. If you haven't heard about it, I'm happy to send you the link because we're open for comments right now. But this was really about wanting to address roadway congestion, minimize safety hazards. The competition for parking in some of these key destinations was just really, really high. So you guys have probably been a part of this competition for parking of like getting all the way there and then having nowhere to put your car. And we're also thinking about alpine meadow environments and what does it mean to have this many people on the trails? What does it mean to have this many people in designated wilderness? And how might we kind of reimagine the space, both physically and temporally, to be providing folks with tools to know what kind of experience they're getting into, enhance that experience, do some quality resource protection, and also be thinking about what does it look like to sustainably manage this for the long term. I think another really interesting feature of this is, if you didn't know, the roads in Mount Rainier are one of the oldest roadway systems in the service. They are older than the service itself. So the roads themselves are a cultural resource. So we wanted to be really thoughtful about which transportation improvements we took on, knowing that the roadway system itself is a historic asset that we wanted to be protecting, which is just a really unique feature. Anyway, so there's more information on that and a whole public meeting that's up on YouTube related to it at parkplanning.mps.gov/Nisqually Corridor. And with that, all the tools and resources I've talked about are publicly available at visitorusemanagement.nps.gov.
Thank you, Rachel. And we'll make sure some of those resources are attached in an email with the recording to registrants next week. Rachel, great food for thought. Before I let you go, you've given folks plenty to think about. Could you also give them a time frame of the entire planning process, ballpark figure? I mean, is this a matter of months or years? Can you just give us a little bit of information on that?
Oh, on the Mount Rainier one?
On the Mount Rainier one or other projects?
Oh, great question. So it depends on how big your problem is. So Mount Rainier, let's use Mount Rainier as an example. We started that project in fall of 2019 and have been working our way through. So some folks know this is actually the third time we've been out for public comment on this. Kind of bringing folks along with us in this process. We'd shared some desired conditions, we shared some preliminary strategies. Now we've got the draft plan out. So it can be something like that. I also know of, there have been some folks in especially the Forest Service, a good friend of mine who works in Wyoming, the forest, used this framework to plan their eclipse event a couple of years ago. They knew the eclipse was coming. They were going to have a lot of people coming onto the national forest. So they used the framework to help walk them through planning just that event. So it could be something you walk yourself through in just a couple of months to help with an event, or a multi-year process on a really big problem like the 3 hours you sometimes wait in line to get into Mount Rainier. We're working on it.
Good point. Joel, did you have a question, sir? I unmuted you.
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting. I'm curious, you talked about how the model is different as it's applied to different places within the National Park Service.
Mm-hmm.
How does it vary based on the differing missions of the various land managers?
And Rachel, before you answer that, I just want to introduce Joel. Joel's from Washington State. He works for Fish and Wildlife.
Great. Hi, Joel. I think that comes back to when we start to think about what are your goals and what are the desired conditions. And that's going to be something that we start to think about the mission of the agency and how we answer that what are we managing for question, right? And so in the Park Service, what are we managing for is going to be tied to things like enabling legislation, fundamental resources, and values. When we start to think about like wilderness areas, what are you managing for in wilderness becomes different, is driven by Wilderness Act and some of those other things. So there's probably some things tied to your mission as an agency and the area you're managing under your agency that are going to have those unique attributes that really form the foundations of those desired conditions. And we let that drive.
Thanks, Joel, and thanks, Rachel. We will move on to Emily Reed, and we'll start to drill down more specifically to Washington destinations. Emily will talk about destinations on the Washington side of the river as well as the Oregon side, but she works for a great organization, a great network in the Columbia Gorge. And Emily, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm very excited to be invited to talk about this. We in the Columbia Gorge live within a grand experiment of a federally designated scenic area that protects both the towns and the lands. And so, as you can imagine, there is a number of lively discussions that are ongoing and already happening about how to balance those two. So I'm very excited about really talking about this tension between welcoming in visitors to our area and then the management of the potential impacts of those. So I'd like to start by asking two very simple questions. One is, how bad can it get? And the second is, what can we do? So to look at how bad it can get, we like to start with some global numbers, just to put it in perspective, because it doesn't always feel like things can get that bad, but we like to see how other places have experienced visitation. So just right off the bat, in 1950, there were 2 million visitors worldwide. By 2017, that number was 1.7 billion, and estimates are up to 1.7 billion is estimated by 2030. So what that looks like is pre-COVID, Yosemite had 4 million visitors a year with like 3-hour delays in getting into the park. Boracay is a 4 square mile island, and the visitors jumped from 200,000 approximately in 2000 up to 2 million just 17 years later, which created a lot of pollution and destroyed 70 to 90% of the coral cover. Angkor Wat, for example, has 2.5 million visitors. And the growth in the urban areas around it has created a shortage of groundwater, which scientists say really affects the possible collapse of the monument. So that tension between visitors and tourists that you were mentioning before, that really has been seen in a number of places, especially in Europe pre-COVID, because it drives up, as you were saying, the cost of housing for locals. Gift shops replace things like butchers and the things that locals use. It takes away the very uniqueness that people come to see. And so, for example, experts believe there will be no locals living in Venice by 2030. So that's only 7 years away. So those are some worst case scenarios. And we really like to start there just by seeing how bad things can get. In the Columbia Gorge, over the past 27 years, we've seen huge numbers of a huge increase in the numbers. So looking closer to home, over 2 million folks visit the historic highway every year. Multnomah Falls has 8,000 visitors each day in the summer. So that's our hotspot. And that comes with huge numbers of lines. Can you imagine an ambulance trying to get through here? Safety issues are a real concern. According to Eric White, of the research social scientist with the Forest Service, hiking and viewing nature made up 90% of those visits. So in the gorge, tourism is recreation. And one of the solutions that we've heard is, simply keep people out. But as Rachel was saying, that is not a value. It's not an option. Not only are 95% of our residents also using all of these beautiful hiking areas, the benefits of nature are really amazing. Lowers your health, lowers your blood pressure, reduces stress, improves your mood, increases focus, all sorts of amazing health benefits. And really, those are the right of everyone to have those benefits. So how do we get that balance that Rachel was talking about? And there's another dynamic at play when it comes to tourism. Tourism is not like any other industry. It neither sells nor creates or owns the product that we make. The tourism companies simply help that experience between the visitor and the place. And no one organization or one person is in control. And so what can we do? What does that mean? What can we do? We can't just say, this is how we want things. It's more complex than that. What we did here in the Gorge is, similar to the rural tourism studios that the state of Washington is doing, we gathered together a group in our region to create the Columbia Gorge Tourism Alliance to help answer some of these questions. So we're a network, and we're made up of a number of non-traditional organizations, such as conservation groups, the Forest Service, our economic development districts, our departments of transportation, tribes, and those are in addition to the standard visitors, things that you would think of. So the visitor centers, the DMOs, the guides, the hotels, the restaurants. So all of these folks pull together to really look at this complexity and really talk about some of the answers to those questions. And at the core is really just the simple agreement to meet. So we also have a 15-year vision. We say, this is what we want it to look like, similar to the project. So basically we follow, for all of the things that we're doing, we follow the same process that Rachel had described. So we have a vision that we all agree on. Here's what we want it to look in the end. And then we have a number of action areas to come up with projects that really address those issues. So from now on, in this presentation, I'd like to talk you through 7 different examples of the things that we've done. Some of them are simpler, some of them are more complex, but they're all things that possibly you can learn from. The first is a project called Ready, Set, Gorge. So this was simply a website. It's a messaging to let folks know how to be safe in their outdoors. It's a website and a brochure, and we also get the message out through simple social media. So these messages are easy for our partners to take and then share on their platforms, and really just let folks know, maybe don't wear your flip-flops, maybe don't bring your fireworks out here, take your water, like be safe. And one of our measurements, as we're talking about, is the number of fewer search and rescues that we have to do, for example. So, and now we have TREAD in Washington, which is fantastic. So it's that, so simply using that platform is an easy way of getting the word out and really helping folks with the, not only the safety, but the dispersal. The other thing that we've added is what's open and closed with our lands, which again, TREAD is able to do. One of the things, so that's number 1. Number 2, during COVID, this is a perfect example. We were able to gather a number of different folks. As you remember, Oregon and Washington had completely different, not completely, but different opening and closure dates. And we are in a situation where we have, as I said, 2 different states and a number of different counties, six different counties and a number of different towns. And we didn't want a situation where one town was saying, come on out, visitors, where the other ones were saying, please stay away. So what we did was, again, meet regularly and develop a messaging with the different phases, so that it made it super easy for us to discuss which phase are we in, where are we comfortable. We did basic voting and said, okay, yes, we're ready for opening. Now we are going to all agree to put out these same messages. Again, very simple, doesn't cost anything, really just a matter of discussing and agreeing. But what we were able to do with that was address shared issues as they came up as well. So for example, at one point, trash became an issue all across the gorge, all at the same time. And we were able to really quickly do a simple script that we sent out to everybody. Again, COVID, we're all buckled down, but each person had the script and their own section of the gorge where they were able to film that, somebody saying that script and from their part. And then we were able to edit it all together and get it out the door within 3 days. And so again, everybody sharing on their own platforms and really being able to address that issue very quickly. So that's number 2. Number 3 is a little bit bigger. This is our food trails. This highlights, it tells folks where to go, where they are sourcing more than 25% local. And so it really highlights those businesses that support our local food system, but it also tells people, pulls people out, pulls them more into Goldendale, to areas that they might not have necessarily been to before. And that really helps spread out that congestion in addition to supporting our local food. Number 4 is car free. This is, again, another big one in terms of developing our transit options, but getting folks out of their cars, out of the congestion into transit is a massive, massive goal of ours. So we have a website that shows all sorts of itineraries for each town, where to go, how do you do that? We also were able to develop a shuttle main shuttle that gets folks quickly into the gorge. Building on that, we had each of these colors is a different transit provider. Then they all started with dial-a-ride for seniors, helping them get to their medical appointments and what have you, and then grew from that to include fixed routes. And these routes then are more coordinated so that they can, so a visitor can hop on and hop off and get to anywhere in the gorge. Another thing that's made that really easy is that they've also developed a gorge pass, which is a pass that you can purchase, an annual pass. You flash it on any of the bus transits, and it makes the whole experience quite simply to the rider, an easy, coordinated one feeling of one system. So just little things that help make it more cohesive. The other thing that we've done is, and I would say that this is number 5, which is permits. So one of the things that's developed in the last couple of years is reservations and permits for folks visiting the really most visited areas. So Multnomah Falls, but also Ape Caves and Lewis River in the Gifford Pinchot, as well as Dog Mountain in the spring on the weekends. This trail is super, but really, again, it all comes down to the parking lot being full and spilling out into the road and creating just unsafe conditions. And so what they've been able to do is add these permits. But if you don't have a permit and you did not make a reservation, that's okay. Hop on transit. You don't need any of those. You go right in without having to pay or having to make plans. Again, like transit plus permits equals this fabulous solution.
And enforcement, right, Emily, from the Forest Service? Ticketing?
Correct.
Got it.
Yes. But you can also take your dog on the bus, which is fabulous.
Oh, good to know.
Okay, I'm going to bring it back to another one that's super simple and easy for any community to do. This is our visitor resource cheat sheet for frontline staff. So anyone that has any interaction with visitors, we put this all together, we update it each year, and we just put all of the information on one single sheet so that they can easily answer those questions for visitors and give them that information that we're wanting visitors to have in terms of how to visit here in a way that's more sustainable. And finally, I would just say number 7 is keep meeting. All of the projects that we have done have been born out of conversations like this, without a budget, without any idea of how to do it, just simple a need, a solution, and we make it happen. We make it happen from there. That's where everything is born. So we know that not any one organization can solve this, but by coming together regularly and consistently, coming back to these questions over and over again, solutions appear and things get done. They just do. And so really coming back to this, even if you don't know where you're gonna start or where it's gonna end, this is where you go. Number 7.
And it's self-perpetuating. You come up with you solve your next problem, and you create your next plan, and you keep on going. Emily, well done.
Exactly. Thank you.
And well said. There's a lot of segue between a few points that Emily mentioned and what Tommy will cover in his presentation. Emily mentioned visitor education and car free. Tommy, that's right up your alley. Why don't you tell us more about what you do near Olympic National Park in Port Angeles?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, really excited to be on here today. This topic is something that is near and dear to my heart. First of all, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where we find our panelists today. My name is Tommy Farris. I'm the owner and general manager of Olympic Hike & Co. I founded Olympic Hike & Co. back in 2016. That first year was me in a 12-passenger van and a whole lot of zeal and passion to get people into my backyard in Olympic National Park, becoming a commercially authorized tour company. But if you fast forward here to 2023, we're now a 18-employee roster providing guided day tours, trailhead shuttles, and guided backpacking trips all throughout Olympic National Park, serving about 3,000 total hikers each year. And between our shuttles and our hikes, we really do care about the visitor experience. So I'm going to go ahead and get my screen shared here and get rolling. Let me just make sure that loads up. Perfect. So the first example I wanted to bring up is something that is was an issue for us here at Hurricane Ridge. So let me go ahead and make sure I can move. There we go. Perfect. So Hurricane Ridge, obviously in a lot of recent news with the tragic burning of the day lodge there atop Hurricane Ridge. So we'll be staying tuned for more dates of reopening. But when we first started our guided tours here in Olympic National Park, there were certain areas like the Hoh Rainforest or Hurricane Ridge that always became problematic for entrance fee stations. And when we started doing our guided snowshoe tours back in 2019, we were encountering when the road would open at 9 o'clock that we would already be in a line of 200, 300 cars, and the parking lot only had space for 150 cars. And so what would happen is that Olympic National Park, once that parking lot does fill, they do a 1 car out, 1 car in policy. And so we had clients that drove from very far away to join this experience. And unfortunately, we were subject to 3 or 4 hour delays until that parking lot had enough space for us to join. And I thought to myself, there had to be a better way to get some collaboration with the National Park Service and with our local partners. And so basically 2 years ago, we started a 3-way partnership between the Hurricane Ridge Winter Sports Club, which is a nonprofit that operates the ski and snowboard area up top Hurricane Ridge, Blackball Transport, which had a 4-wheel drive shuttle bus that could serve 28 passengers, and us with Olympic Hiking Co. And we decided to form this 3-way partnership. We were going to market and sell these tickets online through our website as the kind of shuttle provider and do all the reporting for the park. Blackball provided the driver and the bus, and then the Hurricane Winter Sports Club is a nonprofit that also deeply cares about the visitor experience, and they were able to apply for a lodging tax grant, which allowed us to start this shuttle in a very new way of making it online bookable and at a low fare, so $15 per passenger. And so the goal of this shuttle was to not only allow easier access for visitors and tourists to get up to Hurricane Ridge, but still make it accessible for our local community. Examples of that is we would rent the bus out on Sundays for the Boys and Girls Club occasionally, did various efforts to get all access up to the ridge. But this was a very successful pilot project last year, and we did it again this year, operating on weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, January through March. And so in our 22 shuttles this year, we served about 400 total passengers. And the big key for this shuttle is that for the first time, people were able to park in downtown Port Angeles, knowing they had a shuttle ticket to get to Hurricane Ridge. And so the question that you might be thinking is, what happened there at the entrance fee station? Well, because we worked in tandem with the National Park Service here in Olympic about this shuttle, we had a guaranteed shuttle parking area up top. So as that parking lot would fill, we knew we were able to have that dedicated parking space for our shuttle bus. And so we had a way to alleviate 15 to 20 parking spaces down low and making sure our guests had access up top to Hurricane Ridge. So that was very successful and something that was near and dear to my heart. Being able to serve our community and travelers alike. And I think that would, segue well into kind of my next topic, which is, when you're thinking about peak season in Olympic National Park here, we think Memorial Day through Labor Day. We're right about to start this peak season, right? And so promoting this winter shuttle to Hurricane Ridge was such a helpful way for us to really kind of bring to, education of, this is an amazing place to visit year round. I mean, Hurricane Ridge certainly is one of the more challenging places to visit in the winter if you do not have a 4-wheel drive vehicle or tire chains. But this allowed access to Hurricane Ridge. And it was a reminder for those visiting that, yes, the Hoh Rainforest is open generally 7 days a week in the winter season, as well as Lake Crescent and the Pacific Coast. So much of Olympic National Park remains open. So when we're promoting our tours and we're thinking about our role as a tour operator, of course, we're going to be able to help provide great experiences in the summer season and help educate, about recreating responsibly and leaving no trace, and why we do have early morning departures in the summertime. But when we're able to promote these shoulder season or winter season activities, that allows us to really, broadcast and market of just how beautiful this place is year round. And that's kind of my personal passion, is to really educate visitors when they come in July. It's like, we're really excited to have you here at the Hoh Rainforest, but did you know if you come back in October, these beautiful big leaf maple trees will be decorated with brilliant yellow and red colors of the maple leaves turning for the year, along with just incredible chances of wildlife, things like that. So when I'm talking to visitors or if I'm making marketing materials, I'm thinking about, really looking at the shoulder seasons. And if people are visiting in the summer, it's all about time of day and time of year, right? So if you're going to want to go to Hurricane Ridge in July, for example, when the road does reopen, hopefully this summer, let's say, if you're worried about, having that crowded experience up there. So if you're a DMO or if you're working the front desk at a hotel and you're trying to help educate your visitors, thinking about time of day is a really critical thing. If your guests are prepared, they can bring a headlamp and have a really great sunset walk up on the Hurricane Hill Trail, which is paved and ADA accessible. And so you don't have to go through these midday travel times. So I think knowing before you go and the key steps of how to recreate responsibly is something that is very paramount, not only for us guides to help educate, but for all of us on the front line representing tourism industry companies and businesses, that we get to know our destination and we really do think about what it means to visit each place based on the time of year and the time of day that guests are going to be traveling. And the last thing I would say in terms of our own visitor education, our guides we're so thrilled to have guides that have decades of experience guiding in these national parks. They might be former National Outdoor Leadership School instructors or educators or authors. And so we really deeply care about our guests, really learning from us, leading by example. I think Emily was mentioning that, or it could have even been Rachel, but, we're not the owners of Hurricane Ridge or the Hoh Rainforest, right? We're just stewards of these beautiful places. And when people ask, why do a guided tour? The destinations are the same, the travel time's the same. What's the only difference? It's us as guides, right? So it's our role as guides to not only help connect our guests to each other and have a great group dynamic, but really show them what it means to connect responsibly with nature and what that means. So when we have a tour departure at 7 o'clock in the morning or 7:30, we're educating them. Yeah, it's an early wake up. It's a sacrifice, but we're doing it so that we can make sure that we're accessing these places at the best time of day, given the time of year we're visiting. And then while we're there, education about leaving no trace, the importance of staying on trail, why our beautiful national parks and here in Olympic, why these beautiful scenes are so well preserved is because we're staying on trail, we're respecting these, ancient old growth forests or whatever landscapes we're exploring that day. And so leading by example. And so hopefully I would say for us in the tourism industry, anytime you're referring to a guide service, we're doing our part to hopefully continue that education for these visitors so they are not only inspired to visit again, but do so even more responsibly than before. And I think that would tie in to my last slide here is something that I just finished yesterday. I know we're getting close on time for Q&A, so I'll make this brief. But just on Tuesday, our company, Olympic Hiking Co., partnered with other local tourism operators here in Port Angeles. And this was our second annual kind of tourism and attractions presentation day. And the whole point of this was to partner with, educating various DMOs or visitor center volunteers and all the front lines of our own tourism economy. And what we were doing is educating what tours we offered and how we offer them. But I think the key dynamic too is if we can help educate, our frontline communities, the front desk staff, baristas, restaurant workers, et cetera, anybody that is going to be facing our visitors and even locals alike, the more we can help educate what there is to do in a place, and especially with a professional guiding company, this helps them to be better able to answer guest questions and send them in the right direction, right? So they might only do one tour with us, but then they might do a kayaking tour the next day with another company. And even if we're just a one-stop shop for one part of their trip, we're hopefully going to then prepare them for the rest of their trip. So that's something I've always been passionate about, is making sure there's a great active communication between our National Park Service, our DMOs, our visitor centers, things like that. And that's why, as our current chamber president here in Port Angeles for the board, we were thrilled to have Sula Jacobs, superintendent of Olympic National Park, at our luncheon. So just having these constant dialogues between our public land managers and our community and our business leaders, I think that's always an important conversation to continue having. So that's all I have for today. If anybody ever has any questions about how we set up this shuttle here at Hurricane Ridge, has any questions about what we do in Olympic National Park, please feel free to contact me, and I'm looking forward to dialogue in the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Tommy. And good points on visitor education, seasonality, and dispersal. It reminds me of my time in New Zealand working in a rainforest and having folks come, even in the shoulder season when prices were cheaper. So that kind of was their draw, and of wanting to go hiking, but weren't equipped with rain gear to go hiking in a rainforest. So it's just like, okay, well, you have to have rain gear. You should think about the time of day, the storms. If you don't want to hike in the rain, go and check out this museum, go and visit this place or this place. So there's lots of ways you can kind of push and pull tourists in your destination. So thank you and well said. Michelle, any questions from the audience in the chat?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions from Joel. The first question, and they're kind of related questions. The first question is about visitor dispersal and just sort of how that plays into overall sustainability goals and making sure that we're protecting wildlife. And so whether that's pushing visitors to areas that are not as visited, or kind of same question about time of year. I will open that up to the group.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to that. I think Joel is right. The strategy, we did see some of the some of that backfiring a little bit during COVID, where folks were going to different trails and those trails were getting congested as well. So it is a midterm, it is a very effective strategy for the gorge. So there are places that we definitely want people to visit, that we want the economic love to be spread as well, and that can absolutely manage more folks. In the long term, that's where you see the strategies of the permitting system work really well. They actually did a great pilot last year with the Columbia River Highway, where they monitored, you had to have a reservation for your car, so timed permits. And that actually was budget-wise fairly expensive, but it worked well. So it was a success in terms of folks having that kind of experience of being able to be in the area without having the congestion all around them. And New Zealand actually has some examples of that, where there's one-way trails that you can purchase a time for, and you don't run into anybody else. You are 100% on your own, and they're able to get quite a few folks through those and have that experience at the same time. So but in the meantime, it's still good for us to be dispersing people, both in terms of timing and parts of the day and parts of the week. But yeah, there's just things that you have to do once it gets to be an issue.
Excellent. Oh, is that another question from Deborah?
Yeah, just confirming Emily's title, which I believe it is correct that Emily is the director of the Columbia Gorge Tourism Alliance.
Yeah, Emily, speaking of the Columbia Gorge, could you give any advice to the folks on this webinar today, how to deal with pushback from residents, either on the Oregon side or on the Washington side? I know a lot of the folks or businesses in the Columbia Gorge rely on tourism, but I'm sure those folks want tourism, but I'm sure other local residents, some do not. Where's the balance, or can you strike a balance between those two camps?
Well, I think, again, it's about what kind of tourism and where you want folks, right? So I think most people agree that it's great to have tourism to support our local businesses. This is one of the things we saw during the pandemic as well. Great. Folks can come in and spend their money at these places that are owned by the people that we love and need that support. So I don't think there's any disagreement there. Similar to the dispersal, great, let's have folks go to places that need the love, that aren't going to be so affected. And then otherwise, again, it's similar to the folks in the room that are dealing with visitor issues that we bring in. It's about conversations and talking about these strategies that we have, that it's not an all or nothing. And it can't be an all or nothing. There's no gate. They're coming. So how do you manage them? You do it in really constructive ways. And what would you like to see? And how do we do that? And that's where you get to the strategies that, for example, Rachel was describing. So it's having a conversation.
Well, having a conversation, planning, where do research and data come in? Don't you launch is it a tourism stakeholder survey every 2 years, or is it every year, or how does that play into your decision making and your strategizing?
There's a number of different organizations that do that that research. So, and similar to the state of Washington Tourism or Travel Oregon also does some stakeholder. The Forest Service does their own research. So really, it's a matter of cobbling that all together. And then I mean, I'm just going to say, if you don't have money, Facebook, Facebook messages, see anybody who's posted anything about tourism, and then just read the focus group that ensues, and you'll get a real sense of, local sentiment that way.
Yeah, especially qualitative. Rachel, what about you for research and data? How do you gather that, and how do you share that with gateway communities and tourism stakeholders in the planning process?
I would agree. It's they can be really useful inputs to learning and to knowing more. I think that one of the really interesting things, especially in the context of crowding, what we're kind of talking about, is to remember when you're issuing a visitor survey, the people who show up in your survey are the people who heard it was crowded and still decided to come, found a parking spot, and stayed long enough to answer a survey.
Good point.
So,
self-select, yeah.
So to some extent, like, your sample's kind of limited. And for us as a National Park Service unit, like, our constituents are national. So when we think about who we're managing for. And so that's where I bring this up to say, I think that those studies are super helpful and informative. I use them all the time. I was personally the grad student who did all of Knowles's research for 2 years. They paid for my doctorate. Thank you, Knowles, for that. So as a trained social scientist, I'm here for it. And also kind of travel and tour and mobility studies, but similar to Emily, like, a good public comment period where we ask a quality question can also be super informative. So I think really diversifying how you're asking questions to make sure that you're hearing from everybody, whether they're a future visitor, a current visitor, or a past visitor who stopped coming, and why aren't they coming back? Those are all really important voices, and you might have to access them through different mechanisms.
Good point. Good point.
And
well,
then
folks,
we have a question for Rachel in the chat if we have time for one more.
Yeah, we just
go ahead, Matt.
No, I think we can, if folks want to stay on a little extra, we can take 1 or 2 more questions, but go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so I think it kind of is a good follow-up to that question. How have tribes been engaged in the development and implementation of the VUM framework, including the creation of metrics?
Oh, great. Yeah. So every unit who kind of is implementing the framework or working on it has their own relationship with the traditionally associated tribes with those areas. And so it's maybe unsatisfying, but it's an it depends answer. I'm working with those. And really thinking about, how do we ask a good question? It's something I'm really thoughtful of, about making sure that, again, we're asking a quality question of our tribal partners so that we're making really good use of their time, and asking things that they can really engage on. And so it kind of depends on where we're working and who we're working with. And a lot of times that's a unit by unit level decision. So I know it's not a really helpful answer, but as far as depends on the nature of where we're working and who we're working with, and how involved the tribe wants to be, but there's always a seat for them at the table. And more often we're trying to go to their tables. So I have one project where we meet with the tribe quarterly, and that's on their terms, and we go to them.
I don't see any other questions right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Rachel, Emily, and Tommy. And folks, if you have questions, additional questions for these panelists, you can always email them. Though in the email that you will receive with the recording and other resources, you'll also have the panelists' email address. So feel free to connect with them on LinkedIn or send a question via email. Panelists, if you have to run, that's fine. But if you want to stick around after the webinar to chit chat, that would be great too. Thank you for your time and your intellect on this topic of destination management techniques. And folks on the webinar, thank you for attending the webinar today. And we hope to see you next month as we focus on the intersection and synergy between rural tourism development, rural tourism, and scenic byways. So stay tuned for that in June, and we will see you later. Thanks again, everyone.